Hi, everybody. First of all, I have to bring up something that Chekhov once said, which is you can't put a gun on stage because everyone will be focused on that gun for the entire play and no one will be listening to any of the words that you put out because they're waiting for the gun to go off and who's going to get shot. So you can't put a gun on stage without using it. So I have to go over here and sit in this chair because I've been obsessing about it since yesterday, and I know we used it for the yoga, but I'm going to start out over here. A lovely prop. On my lovely sofa. My name is Toy. I'm a sound designer and a composer for theater, and I have done a little bit of film, but I mostly do theater, and I teach at DePaul University. I have been questioning what to talk about in here because everything has been visual, and how do I present what I do to you, and how can that be inspirational, and what can I give you? So I'm just going to kind of throw out there what I do and why I do it and how I do it, and hopefully something will stick. I am the person who takes an audience on an emotional journey through a live performance. There is an expression that happens on stage which is presented, and I support that as well by giving support to actors and musicians and dancers. Also, what I do is really concentrate on the impression upon the audience and not just the expression of what's happening on stage. Because if something is happening on stage that's really tragic, the impression may need to be that it's funny. So it's not always coinciding what the expression and the impression is. So my job is to figure out what the emotional journey of an audience is. Now there are so many different ways to do that, and it's really hard to go into, and I can literally talk for hours about it. So there are many tactics that we use that have to deal with human perception of vibration. And we take the vibrations that happen around us, they come into our ears, they filter through different nerves in our brain, and we determine what that means, what they are, what those vibrations are, how we feel about them, and then usually there's an emotional reaction to most of them. A lot of it is evolutionary. There is a whole side of why scary movies work really well, or any of my scary shows. It is part of our species to know if there's danger around. And danger is infrasonic sound, which is low-end sound. It is something sharp or percussive that happens nearby that we can't identify. With sight, if something happens in our periphery, we turn to look at it, there's time to kind of judge it. With sound, something happens right near us, we have a fight or flight immediately of an emotional response. That's just how quick the sense works. So I guide that journey. Now, a lot of it, of what we do as a species, is get rid of the sound that we're actually hearing. There is a hum, and not a hum, sorry guys, there's like this hiss of lights that happens in a theater that you're not listening to because your neural pathways have heard them for yesterday and today and have determined that there's no danger, there's nothing that you have to worry about, there's no new information coming in, and we stop listening to it. That's what the human body does. So you will have about 3 to 5 seconds, and then it'll start tapering off, and then unless you change amplitude or frequency of that sound, you can get attention back to it, but then 3 to 5 seconds again, it'll taper off because there's no danger and there's no information coming in. So that's called selective hearing. What I do is I choose the exact selective hearing that an audience hears when watching something visual on stage. Selective hearing is, there are a couple things that could be. The hiss of the lights, that's one thing. Another thing is an emotional selective hearing. If somebody kneels down in front of you to propose marriage on a subway track, you are so emotionally invested in this moment of what's going on that you don't hear the train, you don't hear the people arguing over here about politics or whatever. Nothing else exists, just this moment of emotion. And those are the things that I key into. It's like putting a spotlight on somebody is the same way that I have to literally key people in. The most effective way is interesting, is not about sound, it's about silence. So most of my job is choosing where the silence is, because in a theater, even though there is minimal noise, HVAC noise coming through, it's one place in our world where we can achieve pin drop silence. And it's one of the most effective tools because it's extra heightened because of our aural environment that we live in. We live in a very, very noisy world. We live in a world where people choose their ringtones, where they have surround sound in their houses, where they have their earbuds in constantly. We are always sound designing our lives around us constantly. So to find a moment of silence is really rare. And what happens with that is that it pinpoints somebody in. So either during the silence or directly after silence is usually the moral of the story or something that's really, really important. It usually comes during or right after silence. So I'm going to let you sit there and think about that for a second. Time in theater can be elongated, can be sped up. If I speed things up or raise the pitch in something, it will feel faster. It will feel like it's being more urgent. There are a lot of tricks to what we do, and it has to do with the dynamics of building to crescendos and denouements after a climax, percussive moments and tension-filled moments that come in underneath, underscoring that's lyrical. It's easy to do the part that is scary and foreboding and tension. That's easy because it's ingrained in our bodies. The positive side is a little bit more difficult because that's experiential. Our happy memories of sound are usually experiential with something that has happened to us. So my job on that side becomes more about the collective consciousness of what we all have experienced or something that is similar to all of our experiences, to say that sleigh bells equal Christmas or, that birds are outside, which I will play in a second. But I want to show you an example of dynamics and a build of sort, and I just did this a couple days ago just for here. It's not part of a show or anything. But it gives you a sense of the lows and the simplicity and into complexity and volume and pitch and drama. There it is. So that is about 23 lines of programming in show control. My job did not really become a job, a contracted job, until the 80s when MIDI control came in and started doing show control and we could work as fast as lighting. There has always been sound in theater, in storytelling. We have always sung our stories down to the next generations. We use onomatopoeic words of like splash and thud in order to emphasize it. Those are early sound design ideas. There has been music in 3000 BC of the Japanese and the Chinese theater, the Commedia dell'arte, going all through history. There's always been sound design and music. But the job happened in the 80s, and I started in the 90s, mid-90s. I have to kind of give you a background of where I came from to where I am now to kind of give you a sense of where my thinking comes from. I started off as a ballet dancer. This has been my life. Being in a theater has been my life forever. I started performing at age 5. At age 10, I was in a regional ballet company in upstate New York. By age 14, I was on scholarship at Joffrey Ballet in New York City. And my parents allowed me to move to Greenwich Village alone at age 14, because that's what you do when somebody is driven towards their first career. But they were very formative years of, punk and Billy Idol walking by your door as a 14-year-old every night on his walk. The purple in my hair will never go away. I think it's very informative to my life. But I got disillusioned with ballet because I wanted more in life. I wanted to learn more. I wanted to not stare at a mirror at myself for 8 hours and try to achieve perfection. So I started doing the theater route, and then my father was like, no, now you gotta leave New York, you gotta go to college. So I went to college and got a degree in musical theater at Syracuse University and fell in love with classical acting and directing. So I went to London and studied at RADA and Lambda for classical acting, and then when I moved back to the States, I didn't want to go to New York. So it's the whole failure thing, and I'm over it now, but at the moment it was like failure. So I moved to Chicago thinking I'm gonna be an actress, regional classical actress in Chicago. And I acted for a while, and at the time, you guys will appreciate this, I was temping at Leo Burnett, and I was working at Image Source doing Photoshop backgrounds for PowerPoint, because PowerPoint was really big in late 80s, early 90s. Yeah, so I would play in Photoshop, and then they'd use them for backgrounds in PowerPoint. It was a great job, but I don't like working for other people. So I don't. I like to call the shots. So I became a massage therapist, as you do, and but that's from the whole dance background. It makes sense. So I went into massage, and I was very fortunate to work with Michael Jordan and Magic Johnson, Charles Oakley, and Joe Murphy from the Hawks, and all these great NBA and sports people that would come in. And this is during the whole three-peat time of the Bulls in Chicago, so it was super exciting. Meanwhile, I'm playing guitar and learning music. Now, my mother was a concert pianist, and she used to wake us up with Chopin on Sundays, every Sunday, which is a lovely way to wake a child up, by the way. So music has always been part of my life. So I was learning guitar to kind of be my therapy for an awkward and not very good relationship. So I was playing guitar and learning that, and I was playing open mics, and someone came up to me and said, "Do you want to join a band?" And I was like, "Yeah, of course I want to join a rock and roll band," because you do, if someone asks you. So I have this thing in my life where I have a very hard time saying no. My response is always, "Yeah, sure, I can do that. I can totally do that." So I'm massaging, and I was rock climbing to get over my fear of heights, and I realized it wasn't heights, it was actually stepping off something that I'm afraid of, because I'm afraid I will do that. I don't know why. So I was trying to get over my heights, so I'm rock climbing, I'm getting a lot of acupuncture done. I'm like, oh, my arms are killing my hands. So I was trying to switch into something else, I didn't know what else, and then a friend of mine who I had helped found a theater company with said, would you write the music and sound design for this beautiful Dust Bowl play that they were producing? And I said, sure, I can do that. I started writing music and putting it into the play. Now I have the whole background of acting and directing, that I completely understand what that is. And I found that it was the reverse of my dance, where I was on stage expressing to music and emoting and having this expression towards of music. I was now looking at the visual that was happening in front of me and creating the music that was now going to support that. And it was in the exact reverse. And it was the most rewarding moment to have all these lives just congeal together and go, oh my God, I love this. So I started working nonstop. Tried to quit because I was like, I want to go back to the music, and I didn't choose this, and I couldn't because I kept getting like awards and NEA grants and stuff, and I was just like, all right, I got to keep going. But then I hit my 40s, and I was like, oh God, I'm getting tired now because techs in theater are 14 to 16-hour days every day, and when you're doing 26 shows a year, that's every other week. So I have to multitask because there's usually 5 shows in my head at a time. I'm having meetings for all of them. I'm writing the music for them. I'm building the shows, and then I'm teching them with them. Every 2 weeks is a whole new group of people that I'm working with in a different environment, in a different theater, a different show, different meaning, different emotions. It's crazy. It's a crazy life. What I also didn't realize at the time was that I was the only woman doing it in Chicago. I'm pretty sure there were others on the East Coast, but they didn't linger. They went into engineering or other things. And so what I didn't realize was that I was a pioneer for a younger generation that had never crossed my mind at all. I was just doing, yeah, sure, I could do that. I wasn't really thinking about this as a life. So I'm hitting my 40s, I'm getting tired, and DePaul University had a position opening to build their department. Now I've never taught. I mean, I'd have to teach every director and every team that I'm working with exactly what I'm doing and why I'm doing it, because sound is so intangible. And people have trouble understanding what we do. So I'm always teaching anyway, but I've never taught formally, and all of a sudden I'm charged with building a department for this university. So I'm like, sure, I can do that. So I build this department, and instead of stopping design, I just kind of added another full-time job. At the moment, I am writing a book about the artistry of sound design, which doesn't exist yet. It's the first one. This is how new this all kind of is, even though it's not new at all. So I'm writing this book, and for the first time, I'm actually not doing multiple shows, and I'm not teaching, and I'm concentrating on 1 or 2 things at a time, and I'm realizing now, going into my 50th year, that slowing down's really great. It's really wonderful. So it's been kind of this interesting journey of where my life has been going, but now I'm putting together an organization. Don't know if you know, June 2014, the Tony Awards took away the Sound Design Tonys for sound design and musical. Basically what that says to our community is that we're not part of the team. We have been working very hard to try to get that reinstated. We are founding an organization that is there to support not only the advance of technology, which is so fast for the older generation, going, oh my God, we have to keep up, but the younger generation who comes into the digital level misses all the creativity. But it's a very short time of technology, so we're seeing this in a rapid pace of younger generation not having the skills or the stuff, the creativity that gets us to this point of the artistry of it. And then on the older generation having to advance really fastly while we're working in order to keep up with technology. So there's a lot of mentorship that has to happen, and there's a lot of support that has to happen because all of a sudden people are saying they don't understand what we do. So I'm going to take a little moment here to kind of show you some things of what I do. It's really hard out of context because everything we do is in support of something else. It's never on our own. It's very difficult. But there are things like sound makes up a lot of the environment in a theater. It is my job to pretty much tell you your aural architecture around you. If we are outside at the ocean, let's say, I have to break these walls away and make you feel like you are outside. If we're in a bathroom, I need to kind of bring the walls in and make them reverberant so that you feel like you're in a bathroom with the actors. So I'm in control of your aural architecture as well. Always, there's always birds in the show somewhere. Always. These are spring birds. You have to be very specific about where you are, if you're rural, if you're urban. Everything's very different. Of course, the same thing with the evening. So that you immediately give an outside. If somebody's having a scene and they're talking and this is going on, you get the total feeling that they are outside in a rural environment, crickets. But then there are weird things like, you need to have this person actually be in a dungeon. And that's where you kind of combine and compile different sounds of the people that are screaming in the background that are getting tortured, plus the dripping of the walls because we're in the basement. And you have to kind of think about all of the things in the environment that would actually make that happen. So that's the environmental side of what I do. Repetition in theater is really key. There are a lot of times in a play where you're returning back to an environment, you're returning back to something. I just did The Great Gatsby, and every time he's reaching towards the green light, I had this beautiful piece by Landgard that would come in underneath it, just soaring underneath it. But he did it like 3 or 4 times in the play. If that happens, you have to, every single time he does that and reaches for that green light, you have to have that same piece of music because you're telling the audience, you don't have to worry about it, I gotcha. Because sound is so innate and we're using psychoacoustics about how we are basically making you think and feel. I want to take you on the journey. I don't want you to have to think about where we are or what we're doing. And, if it's a black stage like this, you may not know where we are until I do that. And then you're like, oh, I know where we are now. And you don't even think about it. It is automatic because it's a repetition. That's why 3s work. 3s work because you set it up, you remind, and then you bring it home. But there are times when there has to be 4. So this was a handing off of a letter that happened in a play. This is a play at Lifeline, where it was really important and it was getting urgent as the letter was getting handed off. So the first time it gets handed off. Successful handoff of a letter. Second time. Third time. And then because there was a fourth, the fourth time. And that's when it actually gets to the recipient. So what I did there was I raised it up in pitch. Now it wasn't urgent enough that it had to be sped up, which happens a lot, but it was enough of an emotional urgency, so it was a raise in pitch using the same exact theme. Now, when the audience hears that, it's like, oh, it's the letter. They're following the letter. Because it was associated with that object. So we associate with characters, the theme of characters, the theme of objects, the theme of place, and all of those things are what build up the repetition and the things that we're keying in the audience so they don't have to think about their journey. They just get to ride on it. And the most important thing is what's happening up here on stage and what's being said. This one, it's a musical thing, and then at the very end you add in the sound cue of the paper kind of falling because I'm like that and I want to add a little bit more flourish. And I like complexity in sound because it makes the sound more rich on stage. So that's kind of an example of repetition. But I'm also a composer, so I get asked to do a lot of different genres and time periods. Okay, so when I joined the rock and roll band and had my own band, the rock and roll band was like fraternity cover band, Aretha Franklin, Janis Joplin, kind of like, rock and roll. It's awesome. But my band was this weird kind of folk acoustic thing that was original music, which was much harder to sell. But in theater, the most rewarding thing is that I get to do all different genres and all different styles and all different types of music in part of my composition. So when I was doing 39 Steps and I was asked if I could write like Bernard Herrmann, I was like, yeah, sure, I can do that. Now, Bernard Herrmann is the composer for all the Alfred Hitchcock films and is known as like a master of film composing. And I stupidly agreed and said, yeah, I can do that. And I'm like, oh my God, why did I say that I can do that? Now I have to do it. But you have to, because the show's got to open and you have to do it. And I found out I'm a really good mimicker. So this is one of the pieces from that. But the great thing about theater is that they're only usually about 30 seconds long. Sometimes you get like a minute. So you can really concentrate really in depth to these little tiny gems of a moment. This next one is down south, a play at Steppenwolf called Bluest Eye, which was an African-American play. So this was to represent autumn down south. Now, I am lucky that I surround myself with really amazing musicians, so I kind of have to write the music and then I hire them to play some of it. The rest I do on computer. This next one I did myself on computer. This is for Monster Under the Bed, which was a children's show for the book Monster Under the Bed, but it had to be this big action drama, so... Very movie soundtracky. A lot of theater is going very similar to movies in its writing and its style. That is where our mass theater has now moved to movies and Netflix and streaming. And so theater is following suit as well, so it tends to have a lot of cinematic expressions to it. But this last one I'm going to play is from The Great Gatsby that I just did, where Jane, who's with me tonight, introduced me to Mars Williams, who is the saxophone player from Psychedelic Furs, who played over my tracks, which was amazing. So this was from Great Gatsby. But you can see in all of those the different feelings you get from all those different types of music. This is the style of the play, is the emotional style of the play that you go through as an audience member as you're watching the play. It really gives color to it. It's really hard to express what a good sound design is, because you shouldn't notice us and you shouldn't know what we're doing, and you should just be feeling and emoting and understanding what's happening on stage. Usually if it's noticeable and awkward and you hear something, it's usually not a very good sound design. If it's a big, bold one, like some of these that I played, then of course you're going to notice. But usually you're not noticing us. That's kind of the goal. So it's a kind of thankless job in some aspects, but really rewarding, because when you match up a cello to the word on stage of what's happening and you make an audience cry, there is nothing like that feeling of having that power of support of what is happening and really making them feel what is happening on stage truly, and recognizing what that is in themselves, because what we're doing is throwing these sound waves at an audience, and it's supposed to mimic the same emotional journey that is happening up here. And my last little bit, I'm just going to say one little thing about collaboration because of the amount of people that we work with all the time and the different people that we work with all the time. I think the biggest lessons I have learned, other than to say, yeah, sure, I can do that, is to never leave a room with a question. Every time I've left a room with a question, I have guessed wrong. I think that's the main thing of going through this life, and every door that opens that I've gone through and stepped through, that I always make sure that I understand all the answers to the questions that I have in my head. And as my mother has always said, if we could just save the world by talking, it would be really great. But I still really do believe that we could change the world and save the world just by talking. So thank you all very, very much.